crazy Fireside chat. We're going to be in the Sandbox with Adam and Piyush live at PGC 1. Guys, do you want to come to the stage anyway and come and make yourself nice and comfortable? Give it up for Adam Smart from AppsFlyer and Piyush Mishra from Product Madness, please.
I don't know how many of you have heard our podcast. It's a tiny little podcast that we put together a little while ago. It came as a sort of natural growth. Piyush, I used to work with Piyush. We had a lot of sessions together where we would be looking at what we could potentially do within user acquisition to grow in new areas or areas of innovation. And we used to have sort of weekly catch-ups. And it really kind of took off from there. We did some nice episodes with Tim and Dave from DataSeat. Tim from Kaizen, Dave from DataSeat. And it was really just a sort of organic growth over time, wasn't it?
Yeah. No, it was really interesting. I mean, we sort of started with looking into first UA. Then we realized that UA is not the only thing that people really want to listen to. It's about UA gaming. So we sort of transitioned from the name Level Up UA, which was very close to what Iron Source did. So we sort of thought of changing the name.
Thought it could end up being problematic.
Yeah. So we sort of changed it to In the Sandbox with, and this was before Sandbox became big. So that's one of the big things. But over here we are trying to do a live podcast of In the Sandbox with. That's a podcast on Apple and Spotify. And we have our guest, Shalom. Do you want to start with an introduction?
Sure. First of all, thanks for inviting me. I'm Shalom Mikaeli. I'm the managing director for Digital Turbine here in London. Responsible for EMEA operation on the supply side, on the mediation side. Digital Turbine, as you know, maybe acquired Fiber and NetColony and Appreciate around a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. So we develop and build this operation that involves user acquisitions and monetization. I'll be happy to chat a little bit about the things that are happening on this space.
Should we start with the first question, which is, what do you think about Iron Source Unity deal? No, sorry. we're not going to do that.
What about Playtika Rovio?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Playtika is our competitor, by the way. So, yeah, that's we can
so many
speak
interesting
about
conversations we can't have.
Could be. No, but let's start with the first one. Obviously, because we want to cover the supply side, Adam and I, we are both interested in that particular space because we've always been focused on UA, but we have not looked into how supply side really works because it's been probably looked from an advertiser standpoint and from an MMP standpoint. So we really want to understand on the supply side. Let's start with a very basic thing, like 3 elements that we talk about, which is SSP exchange and ad mediation. Just treat Adam like he's 5 years old, which he is sometimes, but
the for dummies version, definitely.
just start with that.
Okay, so very generally. So think about, the main thing that, describes SSPs, exchange and mediation is that, in maybe a few words, that they all built to run an auction, some sort of auction. They are connected on the supply side, certain sorts of supply side on one side. They get the request, they analyze it and send it to the demand side. On the demand side, there are programmatic buyers, somebody that is willing to pay for this inventory. So they are creating the auction, they're choosing the one that is paying the highest amount of revenue for a specific user for a specific time, and generally display the impression very broadly. But if you dive a little bit deeper, then you can segment that the SSPs and exchanges are relatively, coming from the web space. And they're connected to TVs, to apps, to websites on the SDK-less environment. So they're connected without any SDKs. And the comparison to mediation, on the mediation side, the app world, you have to have an SDK. Those software companies that buy specific users according to different elements are connected with the SDK. The mediation, as it was in the past decade, knew how to mediate between all those SDKs and choose the one that knew to offer the highest, basically, yield on each and every user. This mediation also landscape is changing very quickly now, and it's evolving generally. But that's a very big picture on how those.
So essentially what you're trying to say from an advertiser standpoint, what you're telling me is we're having 4 level of bits in certain sense. When I'm looking as an advertiser, let's say I'm working with Liftoff or a Moloko, right? There's one bid happening over there, and then there's another one happening at the exchange level, and there's another one happening at the SSP level, and then the publisher decides. So 4 level of sort of bidding happening across the board, right?
Exactly. Generally, from the publisher point of view, it doesn't really matter if it's an SSP on exchange. Yeah. From the publisher point of view, it's the same. You can, put in a break, it's even a network. and eventually their goal is to display an impression by the highest yield of impression after decorating the auction. Whether it's Liftoff or Moloko, all the other DSPs that are connected, eventually the request goes to all of them, creates the auction, and gets back with the price. And the mediation's responsibility is to clear it, and eventually the SDK is actually rendering the campaign on the application for the user.
Got it.
That's the general, very, very general overview.
All right then. So let's start with the first question that we've got on a interest level. So I'm a small developer. I'm sitting on a very large DAU. How would I go about choosing between IAA or IAP, in-app purchase or in-app advertising? How would I go about choosing that to begin with? And then if IAA is the right progression path for me, how do I choose which mediator to use? Like, what are the benchmarks in choosing?
Right. So I think that the first question is, regardless of your DAO volume, is actually what is the genre of the game? What is the category? I think that that's quite an important definition, because we know that content within the game is responsible for in-app purchases. We know that we need to understand what is the gaming economy, whether you even have a gaming economy, because that also affects the in-app purchases. So only once you dive deeper over there and understand exactly how the application is set up, you're able to understand how and what kind of business model to implement. But generally speaking, it doesn't really matter about the DAO. You can have lots of DAO, but implementing huge amount of ads. You can have less amount of DAO, and you can run only IAPs. So think about, it's a balance. Think about it as a matrix of, low DAO, high IP, high DAO, like 2-on-2 matrix, when the center of this matrix is basically your genre.
So it depends on the genre, but like also at the same time, and again, probably because we are at 7 minutes and we haven't talked about privacy, we should definitely do it. Just bringing it up because like I think that's
everyone wants to hear about
privacy and
again.
scan. I mean, yeah, they're all obsessed with it. No, but going back, like the reason I'm asking you is right now, even if you're sitting on a certain DAO and your genre may be hyper casual or something, but you really want to make IP work because IA is going like down, like in certain sense, right? And even especially for hyper casual world because of less user data. So do you believe that going forward, even in genres where IA is working, IP would take over?
I believe that our industry is evolving very quickly, and with the removal of identifiers, algorithmic buyers, right, or gaming buyers, they were buying according to algorithmic preferences. They were receiving amount of data, they had to analyze it, and eventually generate the right ROAS for the buyers, for the advertisers. With the fact that they don't have those identifiers anymore, they need to receive additional higher amount of data in order to grade the right conclusions, and therefore they receive more impressions, the prices are going down. So in that regards, in regards to general alternative, there are alternatives for the UA side specifically, and we can speak about how that will change. But the alternatives that we have now, we have seen now in the industry, are bringing additional areas of user acquisition that were not necessarily available in the past several years.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I think elaborate on that.
Yeah.
Sorry, not scripted, but I've got that's how my mind works.
It is scripted,
so.
Adam. We always script this. Come on, let's be honest. Yeah.
As a consequence of all the privacy stuff that's gone on recently and everything else, are direct deals coming in more and more? And that's probably something for you as well, Piyush. Like with other brands, with other partners that you're working with, are you looking now for direct deals because that would give you a very clear measurement of those installs?
Look, when you do a direct deal, you're actually losing out on the whole algorithm part in certain sense because you're buying a particular inventory, right? And the price is very high. So whenever you, like, even if you say, like, you look at the inventory and you say this publisher is converting for you, and you go and buy them at
but if you're sure that's converting really well.
But again, with algorithm, you know that especially right now, the bidding is still at a user level. So I'm not buying the whole audience. I'm still buying a particular user, especially in the Android world where you still have the data. So that's my take on it. But like, what do you think about it, Shalom?
I think that we have the ability to, as an industry, there's a reason that the PMPs were relatively, scarce. They weren't that widespread because algorithmic buyers were buying specific audiences, and that's not necessarily very much available right now. However, if you think about additional ways to implement first, second, and third-party data, and start adding to that additional buyers, like brand buyers, who were not necessarily able to get into the space in the past decade due to the fact that we had a waterfall and we had different networks that knew how to buy the user in the $100 and $200. with the changes in the landscape, the fact that we go into bidding, additional buyers can get in,
Absolutely.
brand buyers, and implementing first, second, third
But does that by its very nature increase the amount of competition for each ad space?
Yes, it should increase.
So you could end up paying a lot more for those installs.
Yeah, that's also my question. Like, I mean, just trying to rephrase what he's asking, right? If brand advertisers come into the gaming world, like which there's a good chance that they would, the CPMs would go for a toss. Like, it will increase by a crazy amount because they can pay whatever they want, more or less. Like the Coca-Cola is the company; they don't care about what CPM they're paying.
Right.
So it will sort of affect how we advertisers are looking at the data, right?
Yes and no. Think about stages. Well, whatever happens in the very long run, maybe yes, but at the first stage, the brand advertisers will not be paying the same CPMs as the gaming advertisers. They are paying different, but they're buying audiences. They're buying the same male between 30 to 40 because they're playing, because there's a World Cup and they would like to run Adidas campaigns. Or, for example, or they're buying female audiences and they have a specific campaign for them. So they're buying those set of audiences, and those set of audiences on 500,000 budget that I have, I want to spend it within a week. So it doesn't.
No, but Shalom, you're thinking it from the current perspective. Let's dial it down like 2 years down the line, right? I mean, at that point in time, when you don't have user level data, and the brands would also go for contextual targeting, contextual data, whatever they can collect. At that point in time, everybody's bidding for the same inventory, right?
Competition should increase prices. Competition should create a way in which those advertisers are competing according to the set rule of data points that they have to display their impression to the user in a real-time environment. And if that creates good performance for the advertiser and increases revenues for the publisher, then that's a win-win.
Okay. I think, Adam, you have the question about mediation, right? So
All right, let's get on to the privacy iOS 14.
Really?
Really?
Yeah.
12 minutes, yeah, let's go.
It's all right. It's not from a UA perspective. So, on your side, I'm really interested to know how the ATT framework, scan, whatever you'd like to call it, how that has affected the way you buy media now. Because obviously you're not getting the user level information that you once were in order to be able to target. So how has that affected the supply side?
So as I said,
in one sentence.
Algorithmically,
It didn't affect them at all.
It didn't necessarily. It did affect the industry in general. But what we take out of it is that not necessarily battling it head in head. What kind of alternatives we have, and the alternatives that we have as a company is finding. Think about buckets of UA today. You have the one bucket which is the Google Play. The second bucket is the App Store. That's a complete majority of UA, right?
Yeah.
But there's another bucket that nobody actually was touching up until now. And that's a bucket of alternative stores. You see that the industry is changing and the landscape is changing in the regulations. There's the Digital Markets Act that came and said that companies and giants have to enable additional competition, like decreases on IAPs, like additional software.
There's a legal there's a legal instruction
It's a
for
regulation.
Apple to do that. It doesn't mean they're going to make it easy for companies to actually go through technically and do it.
That's right, but think about Android for first. In Europe, it's already approved. In
True.
US, there are bills to approve that, so
Yeah,
it will take some time. So now you have companies or stores like Amazon, like Samsung, like Xiaomi, more than 40 of them that are interested to run user acquisition in that sense.
But you've always, to a certain extent, you've always had that in APAC, and that hasn't really changed.
I mean, it originated mostly from the China market. But my question is also like along those lines, right? I mean, the difference between Android and iOS is iOS, the device maker is one.
Yes.
With Android, there are multiple device makers. So I'm not able to envision how exactly the App Store would look like on the iOS side. Is it going to be like, because Apple also has Apple Arcade, specifically for gaming, for example, right? I don't know if you want to call it separate. It's not side-loading technically, but they are sort of investing into that. So how are you picturizing, like, let's say 5 years down the line, if it's allowed?
I picturize next scenario, the OEMs and the carriers, right? They all have missed the market in the past decade, and they understand that I've missed the market. I imagine that when you buy a new phone in different places in the world, you will have the ability to choose what would be the default option of your app store. You will be able to choose which store you are using because of the competition. I don't have the exact preference on how exact that will look like, but the user eventually will be able to use additional stores in which he will understand, and the publishers will encourage. Because think about Epic Games. We all know what happened, right? there is a way in which the industry comes and says, okay, we have to implement something else. Innovation didn't happen up until now in the past 10 years, the past decade, because everything was growing organically. But innovation needs to happen now because we're in some way of plateauing, and this is exactly where the innovation will come from.
But I think the only way that can happen is, Apple have shown that they're very keen on still capturing the 30% of any IAAs or IIPs, sorry. So I guess the only way that could happen is if that cut was still given to those providers, which negates the need for going on to different platforms.
That's the whole point of
right?
creating it, right? But Adam, tell me, like, you're a gamer, and what kind of app store would you actually want on iOS, for example? Because on Android right now, 10 years, it's been like whatever innovation has happened has always happened at a device level, right? I mean, device maker level, certainly. Like Xiaomi has their app store, and then Huawei has their app store, and everybody has their app store. How do you think it's going to work out on the iOS side?
I've only been iOS, so
Yeah.
never really done the whole Android thing. But for me, it's ease of use. Like wherever you would go to install something, the sort of go-to from the phone would be where I would go to install.
But would you, for example, I don't know, would you choose, and like, let's say I
like the fact that it's linked to the OS because that gives faith in it's controlled, you're not going to be ripped off by something within it, blah, blah, blah. But I would certainly be open to other app stores.
Okay, that's
and that's a point, being open to additional app stores brings its whole challenge, right? There are more than 40 app stores. How do you create those, for developers' point of view, how do you create those APKs that, run from app store to app store? Like, you have to have some kind of single solution. And,
I think the market would evolve and sort of create that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's where the innovation would come in eventually at that point in time.
But those are the open things that we have now. It's the US market and those, consolidation of a simple and easy way to bring it all together.
All right,
Yeah.
jumping back to
yeah, we do tend to digress a bit, but yeah.
to the iOS 14 question. We do this a lot, by the way. So would you have said the success or the limited impact iOS 14 has had on the supply side, could that be down to the fact that probabilistic still exists for attribution and that side of things?
That's bold coming from you.
Well, we like to talk about
Fingerprinting? Fingerprinting?
No, let's not call it. Adam would kick us out if we call it fingerprint. I'm telling you right now.
What, from your perspective, what would happen if probabilistic is removed, like everybody's thinking it will be at some point?
Again, I think that you will have to base on different parameters. The industry knows how to evolve and how to invent itself. There will be additional mechanics.
Specifically,
the prices
now,
can go down.
Do you think there is a way of dealing with that now off the shelf that already exists?
His question basically is stop tomorrow. What happens?
Yeah.
In the short term, there might be impact on the prices and there might be impact on the revenues, and that's the very immediate one. Until we as an industry can come up with additional solutions that can compensate that. And again, those solutions will come because as an industry, this industry will love to make revenues. We like to be innovative. We like to find technological solutions for problems. And I think that will happen.
Fair enough.
In the short term, if you look, I think that prices will go down.
Do you think Piyush, this is more for you, actually, do you think the companies that are doing ATT in the background, so really sort of monitoring the installs through ATT, making sure that they can, or scan, sorry, making sure that the numbers are correct.
Yeah.
Do you think they will benefit if and when
I do believe they will benefit, and I think right now also there's a big problem, for example, especially with DSPs and ad networks where probabilistic is sort of allowed. What Scan did was create a level playing field, but then with probabilistic on, it again there was no level playing field because right now they're operating at a user level data versus where Facebook and TikTok operating with Scan level data, right? Which is not aggregated, which is completely aggregated, which is not user level. So eventually what happens is I think there will be a switch where the reallocation of budget would happen from an advertiser standpoint, because right now all the digital turbines and Ad Colony and Liftoff and others, they are actually benefiting from it, which is fair. Like right now they will benefit, but eventually in the long run when probabilistic is paused, I do believe there's going to be relocation of budget, and and I personally believe the companies, the DSPs that I've been talking to, I don't think they are ready for Scan world right now. I'm not able to envision how would they operate, because Facebook, TikTok are single apps. They have some sort of ID and internal data to actually figure out how do we do the targeting. With DSPs, they are like 30 apps and there is no user level data. So it's about buying contextual data and buying an audience going forward, which would... Yeah, no, definitely.
Let
I
us
think
know.
we're, yeah.
But I definitely agree. Just one comment on that. While the allocation of budget happens, if you can find a way to create those PMPs and charge differential pricing, then you can mitigate somehow the impact. Brands bring together, segmenting the audiences and differentiating pricing, those audiences, then you can mitigate.
Yeah, audience segmentation needs to also evolve. Right now, nobody's looking at it in
Yes,
certain
yes.
sense. I think that would also sort of change.
Yes.
But yeah, we are out of time. So we had a very basic question, by the way, about asking which animations should we go for, but we are really out of time. Yeah.
13 seconds, will enough?
10 seconds, just choose one. No. But thanks a lot, Shalom, for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very
This
much.
is Adam and me. We do a podcast. Our podcast is in the Sandbox with. It's on Spotify and Apple, and that's the pitch that I would do. Thanks a lot for everybody joining, and cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.